Hey guys, I was going to show everybody how to clean the trucks on this Kato SD40-2 engine. I have a few cats, and on my layout I tend to get a lot of little fuzz and hair and fiber that will clog the underside of my trucks on my N-scale engines. So this front truck I've already cleaned. On this particular model, it's really easy to take these off. Some of the models you have to take the shell off of these Kato's engines and then unscrew the inside. I'll show you one of those later. But with this one, this SD40-2 model, all you do is just gently kind of grab and squeeze, and that thing just snaps right off and exposes the inside of the trucks with all of the gears, and we're going to clean out all that fuzz. Now be careful when you take this off. On the inside of this motor assembly, this thing rotates, and there's a brass flywheel right there with two little plastic pieces that will fall off and get lost really easy, so you want to make sure that you're doing this over a good workbench. So I'm going to pull that out to show you guys. A good pair of very fine tipped tweezers is a great tool to have. So that just sits right inside, but you can see some of the fuzz that we've got on here. So we're going to clean all that off, but even on that flywheel there's a lot of fuzz and gunk that we'll clean off from here. But on the end of that, there's two little plastic wheels that we'll set aside, and be careful not to lose those. So look at all of that fuzz that we just pulled off of that flywheel. And then I'm going to take the edge of the tweezers and just run it as I twist that flywheel, and it will pull a lot of that gunk and fuzz out of the flywheel that then gets stuck in your gears. I haven't cleaned this engine for probably more than a year. I'm going to set that aside here. I've also just used a little needle or a pin. Let me show you here. Just a little fabric pin, and you can just take the end of that and twist it through. There, we got a bunch of gunk off of that. I've cleaned the brass flywheel, and you could do that with like a light bristled brush or a toothbrush or something there, but some of the pieces are so small I worry about them being lost. So I've just picked up this little plastic washer, and I'm going to stick it back on, and then I'm going to set that aside so that piece doesn't get bumped or fall on the floor. It would be hard to find. So back to our trucks and our gear assembly. Maybe a little bit hard to see, but yeah, we've got a definite large amount of fuzz and little cat hairs that are stuck in this thing. So I'm going to pop this whole thing apart. So on this assembly, the side of the trucks is just one molded plastic piece that comes across the top, and it separates from the rest of the bottom. You want to be careful. This flywheel right here will pop out when you separate this sometimes, so just kind of squeeze on the end of that, and you can see how the trucks begin to separate there from the bottom. And be careful, all these pieces will kind of fly out when you kind of spread this and pop this gearbox apart. So you can see all of that fuzz, lots of stuff in there that we need to clean. On this assembly, you can go ahead and pull each of your wheels right out, set them down, and then it's going to free up your brass contacts that go down on the side of your wheel pickups. So this one is a good, if you can see this actually highlights a problem where a lot of people think that their truck is clean, but you can see on the end of the pin where it attaches to the brass pickups, which then feeds the electrical current down from the tracks up into the engine. Well, those pins fit into these little points here, and these get all full of gunk and hair, and you wouldn't think it's going to do much, but you can see all that fuzz that's collected around the end of this little pin on the end of the wheel, and that will collect down into the divot on your brass pickup, and it will prevent the electrical current, so your engine will kind of stall and sputter. So you'll want to clean really well the outside pin, get all of that fuzz off, get all around the gears. Yeah, look at all that junk. Wow, dirty. And I would consider myself as somebody who has a pretty clean track, but it's just cats and kids and dust in the air. Wow, look at all of that off of just that one wheel assembly. And I've taken these gears out before on other models, and you know, all the pieces are so tiny, I've had a hard time getting them back in, and so I do my best to try to just get everything out with my tweezers and just run the gears, and that's done okay for me. And then what I do to just kind of get the remainder of any fuzz or hair off, just take a little stiffer brush and just brush off any remaining little dust or fuzz that might be on there. And we'll clean off each of these gears. And there's just a ton of fuzz wrapped around the wheels. Now, I did lube these about a year ago when I cleaned this last, and it looks like it's still got plenty of lube, and so I will not be oiling or lubing these again when I put it back together. Doesn't take very much, a little goes a long ways. Okay, now I've got all my pieces cleaned here. Now the challenge is putting this all back together. Just on the inside of this truck. So when it's sitting underneath the engine, it's facing kind of this way. So you're going to turn it upside down, and then just on the inside, maybe if I point to it with this little needle, that'll be easier. There is a little raised plastic bump right there, and that corresponds to this hole that is in the center of your brass pickups. So we're going to try to fit that using my tweezers. Kind of fit that brass pickup down on there, and it will rest right on that little hole there. It's snapped in place. And then I'm going to pick up my other brass pickup, and you want to be careful with these. They're real thin, they'll bend very easy. And then these wheels, it doesn't matter which way they face, the gear is centered, and so I'm going to just angle the pin down into that little cup that I identified earlier on the brass pickup. Let's see if we can get that to stick. There it goes. Okay, we got the first one mounted on both sides. And let's do the other end. And then just kind of flex that plastic back out. There we go. Now we'll stick the middle one back in. And then we're almost there. Got it. So all three of those gears, and then this thing just turns upside down, and we can just set it on top and it just snaps into place. So I'll maybe show you from this side. The gears are lined up. There we go. It's all together, and then I usually just kind of turn the wheels underneath, make sure all my gears are going to spin, that I don't have anything jammed or caught in there. This is all of the fuzz that came out of that one truck. I collected it in this little thing. And wow, check that out, what a mess. So that was certainly going to jam up my gears, my wheels, but that all came out of this one truck. The front one was even worse because it picks up everything as it goes around the track first. So then on this specific Kato model, we're going to grab that flywheel that we set aside, the brass flywheel, and make sure it has both of those clear plastic washers. And then down inside of the engine, there's this brass flywheel. I'm probably calling this wrong. That's a brass gear that I have my tweezers on. So that brass flywheel, it kind of has a hexagonal nut shape to it. The end of this plastic piece fits down into that nut, and then you have to set the brass spindle gear back into this swivel plastic piece, and that should swivel back and forth. You can see it's all connected properly. And then just take with this model, the gear then just sets right back down on top, and you'll want to align those 4 little tabs and just kind of angle it down over that brass gear. There it is, and it snaps back into place. So I want to show you quickly, that's this SD40-2 model on Kato, and I'm going to show you now how to do one of the other Kato models, because the trucks come apart in a different fashion. Okay guys, so this is Kato's ES44AC, the Gevo, the GE. I love this engine. This is a cool engine. A couple of my other engines are all the same method of cleaning and taking apart as this one. And so this is that SD40-2 that we took apart earlier, where the trucks just kind of snapped off the bottom. Well, on these different models, you have to unscrew it to get the trucks off. So you can pull as hard as you want, but you're just going to break your engine here. So what we're going to do, again, just kind of grab the middle piece and then gently just kind of rock the front back and forth as you're pulling back this piece. Careful, because that'll pop off on the end. So grab kind of the middle and rock it back and forth. Then that plastic shell just kind of comes off. And then with this one, to clean the inside of those trucks and take the assembly apart, you have to unscrew it. So here I've got my decoder. I'm going to just take my decoder chip off. And this DCC system is so slick, so cool, it just pops right out. And then I've got some Kapton tape there to keep it from shorting out with the decoder. So I'm going to just peel up one side of that so we can take the engine apart. So then on the sides you got these screws here and there, and again, make sure you're doing this over a table. There's some nuts on the back side that'll pop off and fall if you get lost really easy if you're not careful. So I'm going to unscrew that, and that nut's just going to fall right off the back side. Then we'll unscrew the other side. And then these 2 pieces of the engine are going to come off once I take this center plastic piece off. So that one, again, just kind of wiggle it free, pops off the bottom. We'll set that aside. There you go, there's those 2 nuts that came off, so make sure you don't lose those. And then your engine's going to fall in half here. once we pry this out. Okay, so now we've got our two halves of the engine. The motor and things, don't even really need to remove that. Looks pretty clean. So then to get to these gear assemblies, I'm going to go ahead and set this up above. Get our screws out of the way. These gear assemblies are a little bit different in how they come apart. What I've found is easiest on the back sides, when you turn it over, there's a little slit right there, and then on this other side right here. And if you just take a little flathead screwdriver and just slide that in, twist just slightly, and it'll pop it apart. So we just lightly slide it in there, and then it pops that gearbox apart. And you can take that off. Now this one's a little different, so those brass pickups aren't shaped the same as the other engine that we took apart. But again, look at that. Got a bunch of stuff in there. Okay, so now I've got this taken apart. Now these gear wheels, they just snap out, so you can just lightly pop them out. And I'm going to take all three off. Just lightly snaps apart. And then comes in there. Lots of hair and stuff in there. So we're going to clean all of this really good, get all of the fuzz out of there. Wow, look at this. Check that out. That's nasty, huh? Cat hair. I like our cats, but they are not good on little N-scale engines. So anyway, we'll get this all cleaned up, and then we'll show you how to put it all back together. So make sure and clean those really good. We're gonna clean this, and then we're gonna clean these little brass gears. Now this assembly is kind of similar to the other one. You can pick that up, and again, be careful. This square plastic piece pops off, and you can set that aside. The other one will slide back and forth, but yeah, we got some gunk in there. There we go. Look at that. So yeah, these engines are going to run a ton better once we get them all cleaned up. The last time I lubed this, I maybe have put a tiny bit too much. So where I will lube my engines is just put a tiny drop right on that brass gear, and you don't need to lube anything through here. I did that once. Thought I would try to lube these edges, and it actually got oil in the engine, and I think it burned it up. Anyways, it messed it up. And so on these brass flywheels, I have never since felt the need to lube those. But really, whenever I've had a squeaky problem or an engine that's making noise, if I just lube these brass gears, that's been sufficient to solve the problem. And then when I do that, I just drip just a tiny drop onto that gear, and then it runs down through the rest of these other gears. You don't need to put it down below, or else you'll build up too much gunk. On these Kato engines, they're pretty smooth. So even after that, just that one drop, it looks like I've got a little extra oil. So I'm going to just dab this with some pointed Q-tips. Got it in the makeup aisle. Ask your wife to go get it for you if you're embarrassed. I'm dabbing just some of that excess oil because it looks like it had a little buildup. And then you can see, maybe with this light right there, I've got a little bit of oily gunk built up. So I'm going to just soak that up with the Q-tip and wipe that off. Get that out. So yeah, pointed Q-tips, they're handy. So I'm going to snap these wheels back in place. If you grab that bottom assembly, whoops, now on this one the gears are offset. So you want to make sure the gears line up when you put them back in that assembly, and then they just snap right back in place. So all clean, no more cat hair. So I'm just squeezing those brass pickups on the side of the wheels, and then it slides, if you recall, slides right in together. Okay, so I'm going to just put it together and then snaps back into place, hopefully. Oh, I think I got it backwards. Yep, I think I do. So let's see if I can keep that from falling apart. So I'm going to turn the bottom around and then try this again. So I'm just going to slide it right down into those wheel joints. Now listen to this. There you go. I just had that bottom piece on backwards. So snaps all back together. Let's test it, make sure our gears spin. Yep, they're working. Everything's working right. Okay, so we're going to put this back together. I'm going to show you just so that it looks, well, just so you can see it on the camera. So it just fits right in there like that when it's all assembled. Okay, so put those in there, the two metal halves of your engine will just kind of fit back together, and when your trucks are set in the right place, you'll know they won't fall off. If they're not in correctly, then they'll just fall down. So I'm going to put our two hex nuts on either end, and we'll get this thing screwed back together. Just lightly tighten, don't need to go too hard on that. Okay, so we got those screws put back together, got our trucks in the right spot. Now we're gonna put I'm gonna put my Kapton tape back down over that other side, and then get our TC. This is a TCS decoder. Make sure that that little brass flange is underneath as we put that in. Okay, and then that just slides forward, sets in place. Okay, and then these little brass things popped off while I was doing all this. They're really easy to put back in, and these are the connections for the brass hookups. These brass pickups that are on your truck assemblies rub against the side of these, and they just fit in a little groove right on the bottom of your engine. Lots of little pieces to put back together when you're doing this, but it's not hard, just takes a little patience, and then your engines will run so much better when it's all done. Okay, so I want you to note, on when you put that little brass piece back on, make sure that it is on top of your pickup, brass pickup flange from the trucks. But underneath this metal piece here, because that puts pressure on it, so it will push down and make sure it stays connected. If it sits on top of that this piece, if you don't have it down correctly, then it will be too loose and you'll lose connectivity. So that's just kind of forces it to go down. And some of these I've had to bend down a little bit and make sure that they are touching. So this one you can see that I've it comes from the factory bent a little bit, but I've exaggerated the bend in those to make sure that it bends down on the ends and connects with your brass pickup connections on your trucks. So we got one side, and then it just slips right underneath a groove on the side of the engine casing. So when I started out working or wanting to do an N-scale layout, I researched it a little bit, and I started with DCC. And with these drop-in decoders, it's really been very easy. So we are ready to snap the cover back on. It just slides down into place, and then that bottom piece fits right there. Sometimes they get caught, and you want to make sure that it's not jammed on anything, but I think we are set. We are ready to go. Everything's back together. It's cleaned. Wheel assembly looks good. And so there we got those two engines ready to go use on my N-scale layout.